This is Amy Nielsen, SeedWorld US editor. I'm here today with Andy Levine, CEO of ASTA, and Dan Four, Vice President at Remington Seeds and the Chair of the ASTA Board. I just wanted to sit down with Andy and Dan to talk about some of the ASTA priorities for 2025. So let's just jump right into it, Andy. What are ASTA's top 3 priorities for 2025?
Well, it's always hard to put it into just a bucket of 3 when we come into, especially a time frame like this. So with the new administration coming in, there'll be a lot of new political appointees that have to go through the Senate confirmation process. We also have new leadership in the House and Senate. So Congress is going to be changing a lot, committees and everything else. And so we've got to be ready to be that face and that voice for the seed industry, whether it's coming from our member companies in the States or whether it's coming from us in Washington, D.C. We've got to get that message to the administration. So that's job number 1, at least in the first quarter of 2025. Number 2, we've really got to continue to push our efforts and our priorities in the Farm Bill. We've got to get one passed, and we've got to get that certainty to America's farmers, and that's really key. And then third, we've got to continue this effort to push that messaging about all of the innovation and research that goes into producing the high quality seed that our members produce for America's farmers. Got to be message number 1 for us because there's so much of that investment that's done on an annual basis.
So you mentioned the Farm Bill. Obviously, that's top of mind for all of us, really. So without a new Farm Bill yet, and a lot of things ending at the end of this month, what key policies or regulations are you most focused on?
Well, the Farm Bill is number 1. We likely will see an extension at the end of the year. It expires December 31st. Then Congress is already talking about what does an extension look like. So that gives us time going into the next administration. Right now, we're not really looking at any new regulations at this point, just because we're at the end of a session. All the bills have to be reintroduced next year. And an outgoing administration really is not trying to propose anything new. So it really is kind of that waiting period between 2 administrations at this point. In the future, we'll look at conservation issues, we'll look at sustainability issues, and we'll just look at some basic pesticide and seed policy issues.
All these shifts seem just a little bit overwhelming, but you seem to just be handling it with ease somehow.
Well, we go through enough of these over time. In the since Obama administration, we've gone 4 years, and now it's been up 4 years. And so it's a lot better when you have that smooth 8-year term and a president serves 2 terms. And so the administration is not changing. The other thing that we've seen, Amy, over the last probably administrations is a lot bigger swing in policy from the administration. And so a Republican will be a little bit more conservative in their hand on their foot on the gas pedal. Democrats will be a little bit more conservative or liberal on their foot on the brake. And so one way or the other, you get that swing, and there used to be small swings, and now we're seeing pretty dramatic swings, and that does a lot for business, and it does a lot for agriculture. So those are the concerns that we see in these administrative changes. So Dan, what's ASTA doing on the state level legislation? How are we cooperating there or advocating?
Yeah. Well, as Andy mentioned, we've got a lot of new folks coming into the government, right, with the administration change, and we have our ASTA staff that's certainly engaged with all the state level politicians, but at the same time, we work very hard to engage our ASTA membership. And that's one of the key roles that we see as that advocacy level, bringing folks that might not be as familiar with seed and seed's role in agriculture and the important issues, challenges, and opportunities that we face, and making sure that they're aware of what our needs are and ensuring that legislation that might not go forward at the federal level might get bumped to the state level. And there we need to make sure that those are farmer and industry-friendly policies that get enacted.
Yeah, we work really, really closely with our state partners, state seed associations and state agribusiness associations, depending on what the structure will be in certain areas of the country, as well as our regional associations. They help bring that local message, that zip code, as we like to call it, message. We can communicate it from Virginia, from D.C., where we are located, but when you can get it to regulators and legislators from their own backyard, that means a lot. And so we've got to echo that between the 2 of us.
Yeah, a lot of this conversation makes me think that this year's leadership summit is more important than ever. What do you have to say about that?
I would certainly say it's one of the most important ones that we've had. We're just with the sheer amount of change that's happening in government. And we've got a great program that we're putting together. And it's one of the few opportunities that we'll have to bring together folks from the seed industry to meet with their Congress people and have conversations across the table and talk about what's important. So I certainly think it's going to be an amazing conference, and we look forward to seeing a lot of folks there in June.
Yeah, and the timing couldn't be better. I mean, with all of this change, there'll be a lot of new people in positions. They'll just be hitting the ground running after going through this approval process, and we'll probably have a farm bill. So likely USDA will be in the process of implementing the new farm bill and making changes. So our members, seed industry representatives, can get in front of those people during this process, and it's going to be key. 6 months into a new administration, it's about the right time to really hit the ground and start pushing your issues and your concerns and educating. So we're really excited about the one in 2025 in January.
And just get all those members up in front of all the new congressmen and senators. It's going to be a great time.
It really is. Yeah.
So Dan, let's shift gears just a little bit and talk about, the growing interest in regenerative ag.
Okay.
So what steps is ASTA taking to address that?
Well, first off, a few years ago, we stood up a sustainability pillar as part of our strategic plan. So we realized several years ago that it wasn't enough to have sustainability embedded in the other aspects of ASTA strategy, and we really needed to have a focus on sustainability. Now, obviously, sustainability means a lot of different things to different people. So what we've tried to stay focused on is what is the role of the seed industry in helping with regenerative agriculture or sustainability practices. And one thing that I was really happy to see at the recent Western Seed Association meeting, where ASTA had a farm and lawn seed session, was we actually brought data that we've been able to work with the U.S. government on and showing what cover crop, for example, as a regenerative practice trends have been. And now we're working to make that information available to members so that our members can make informed decisions about where we see growth in practices like cover crops happening. But also there's things like the farm bill that Andy mentioned and conservation titles that we're very focused on and making sure that those tools remain available to America's farmers and that we can have a sustainable ag landscape.
We've got a strong participation in a group. It's called the Food and Agriculture Climate Alliance. Mm-hmm. And we were one of the original board members of that organization. Now it's close to 70 or 75. We've got several very prominent national environmental organizations like Ducks Unlimited involved in it. And being in that, we can talk about whether it's conservation lands and CRP or whether it's cover crops, anything that comes into play with planting a seed for conservation purposes and sustainability purposes. We're involved there. So you think about it, it's pretty daunting sometimes when we talk about reclamation in the West because of fires. And then we talk about conservation east of the Mississippi, or grasslands conservation. All of those programs our members are involved in. And so when we start to think about that opportunity to address either regenerative or sustainability, high quality seed starts that process for those programs. So it's been pretty neat to be so deeply involved.
Andy, a lot of important patents are expiring here in 2025, 2027, and I think as far out as 2029, but really a lot of genetics are coming off patent. So what kind of opportunities do you see there?
Well, I think there's a number of opportunities. Right now, there is a process that's out there with respect to being able to take those, on the one hand, traits that are being regulated through EPA or the coordinated framework biotechnology policy and bring them into into a generic form. It's a little more complicated. It probably needs to be further modified because there is a global aspect of that too. You've got to keep those products registered globally in order to comply, so that we can sell seed to grain farmers, and grain farmers can move the grain globally. So it's a complicated process. So we've got to continue to look at where we can do that from the trade standpoint. But then we've got the genetic standpoint. How do seed companies get access to the genetics? How can they potentially work them into their breeding programs? And do they look to also introduce some of the generic traits that are coming off patent? So a lot of evolution I think we're going to see. It's a bit of a challenging process because it's not like taking a generic chemistry where you just have somebody blend something. This is producing it, integrating the traits and everything else.
Dan, as a VP of a seed company, are you excited about any of that?
Well, the company that I work for is actually a contract production company. So we work with customers for their production needs. So obviously, we're encouraged to see that the companies that are owners of trait patents, genetics patents, are working very closely at seed companies that are marketing those brands to enable them to offer those products to the market. And then our company, Remington Seeds, is happy to produce those products.
Yeah.
So, looking forward, what are you most optimistic about? Or on the other hand, what keeps you up at night?
So that's a good question. So I would be optimistic. Andy mentioned a little while ago just about innovation. There's so much innovation that's happening that we just had a presentation from Dan Bossi this morning, right? And awesome presentation, but it's easy to get somewhat pessimistic when you look at the tea leaves right now of what's going on in commodity markets. But I'm very optimistic about the conversations and the spirit of innovation that our industry has to address challenges head on, figure things out, and know that we're in a cycle that will eventually come out of. In the presentation that Dan shared this morning, he had the Purdue Ag Economy Barometer that showed that farmers are as optimistic as they were 3 years ago after being in a pretty big slump with the recent commodity price slide. And I'm optimistic because farmers are optimistic, because if your ultimate end user customers are pessimistic, then that's not necessarily a good thing. I would say, lastly, I'm optimistic again about just the conversations that I've been a part of this week, and that we'll continue to be a part of, just trying to figure things out. And you have to be optimistic to be in ag. Otherwise, it's not a very good run. As far as what keeps you up at night, I'm actually a pretty good sleeper. So I don't try to stay up too late, but try to get good rest. But I think one consistent theme that again I've heard here, and it's quite apparent, is just the challenge with attracting and retaining talent into the ag industry. So I think we've got some more conversations that are quite evident about how do we bring people into the seed industry, how do we get them up the learning curve and fill important roles for the sustainability of our industry going forward.
I know that's something that's very important to you. We've actually talked about that exact topic before.
Exactly.
About trying to get that talent in there and keep them there. So I'm glad that you're still thinking about it.
Yes, for sure. I wouldn't say it keep me up.
Right.
I wake up and have coffee and think.
There you go.
Hey.
I would say on the optimistic side, I'm very similar to Dan. The research and development and discovery goes on in this industry on an annual basis, just phenomenal. I always look at it as Moore's law of computing. It continues to take that hockey stick trajectory of discovery. And when you discover it in one crop, oftentimes it's very similar in another crop. So it's not like, just black and white. You know that. And it's on this part of the gene pool, the genetic code over here. It's going to be in a similar spot over here. So narrowing it down is the ultimate challenge. But you start to find out what causes that plant to do what it does, positively or negatively. How do you breed away from the negative side and breed toward the positives? And so a lot of people talk about AI and plant breeding. We've been doing AI and plant breeding for years. It's called predictive breeding. AI is going to help us become more precise. So really optimistic about that, and I think it will help address a lot of the issues. Things that keep me up at night, I wish I was as good a sleeper.
Me too. Me too.
I think the innovation part of it is one of those things, because the ability to develop policy or regulation around that discovery doesn't keep up with the pace of discovery. And so you end up setting policies for something that was actually developed 10 years ago. By the time they get to the policy, because it could take 5 to 10 years in some cases to get a regulation out through the process. And so that hinders or somewhat handcuffs that discovery. I guess I would throw another one in that kind of does keep me up, is the issue of trade. U.S. agriculture relies heavily on global trade. And we've stepped back from, being a leader globally in trade over the last couple of years, maybe more than 4. And we've got to get back to that. I think the world is somewhat stepping back and becoming a little bit more isolationist, and that's not good for agriculture, especially American agriculture. And that downward pressure will continue to put pressure on our customers, America's farmers, and in the economy. So that's an area I hope we see turn around in the coming years to really make a difference in the opportunities that are there globally.
I really appreciate you both coming and sharing perspective on some of these issues. And I will let you get back to your busy schedules. I know that you've got a lot left to accomplish while we're here, but thank you again for sitting down.
Great. We appreciate it, Amy.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Amy,
Andy.
very much. All right.